Okay, I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. It's exam week. You're in the final stretch of your master's degree.
Hmm.
But instead of sitting in some quiet library, frantically writing essays on pharmacology or whatever, you're standing in an empty room and you put on a high-end VR headset.
Okay, I'm with you. Setting the scene.
You are instantly transported. You're in this high-noise, high-fidelity simulation of a cocktail party. The lighting's dim, the chatter is loud. An avatar, a bartender, comes up to you and offers you a drink, your drink of choice from your past. And your exam is to navigate that, to actually regulate your heart rate, which the system is tracking, and practice these specific somatic techniques to just say no without having a massive stress response.
Wow.
Then the second you take the headset off, you walk out of that digital bar and step into a physical room in London to take part in an ancient African community circle.
Sounds like a complete collision of two different worlds. You've got this high-tech Silicon Valley thing on one hand,
Right.
and then ancient tribal wisdom on the other. Yeah.
Exactly. And usually those two worlds they do not talk to each other. But according to the curriculum documents we've been digging into this week, this isn't science fiction. This is the actual syllabus for a new degree, the Master of Science in Integrative Recovery Systems and Digital Therapeutics.
Or the MSc IRS DTX, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. But today we're going to strip away the jargon and, really get into the mechanics of it. Because what we're looking at is an attempt to build a completely new kind of professional.
Right.
They don't call them counselors. They don't call them therapists. They're calling them recovery architects.
And I think that title, architect, is the absolute perfect place to start. Because when you look at what these sources call the crisis of fragmentation, you realize we don't need more repairmen.
Yeah.
We need structural engineers.
Right.
The documents paint a pretty bleak picture of the current landscape. They talk about a siloed system. Can you maybe walk us through what that actually looks like for someone right now? Why do we need an architect?
Sure. So imagine a typical path for someone struggling with a severe addiction. You have a crisis. You go to a medical facility for detox. That's the biosilo.
Okay.
They stabilize your biology. They make sure you don't die from withdrawal. And they are, fantastic at that acute phase. But then once your system is clean, you're discharged.
And that's that revolving door the text talks about.
Precisely. You're medically stable, but you're sent right back into the exact same social environment, the same stress, the same loneliness that, fueled the addiction to begin with. The medical side just doesn't talk to the social side.
So they never connect.
Never. You might have a peer support group, like a 12-step program, but they aren't integrated with your medical records or your psychological care.
So the house keeps falling down because the foundation, the biology, isn't connected to the walls, the sociology. That's a great analogy. And this recovery architect is designed to be what they call a technosystemic practitioner. Someone who gets the medical necessity of detox, but also understands that without that scaffolding of community and purpose, the biology is just going to crash again.
There's a distinction in the module breakdown that really jumped out at me. They contrast retrospective therapy with systemic coaching. Now, most of us, when we think of rehab, we think of therapy, digging into the past.
Right, like archaeology.
Exactly. Why did my parents do this? What's my trauma? And this program seems to be saying, well, that's not enough.
It's not that it's not useful, but the Mounting model, which this degree is based on, argues that it's just insufficient for, sustainable recovery. Traditional therapy often treats the client as a broken object that needs fixing. It's very pathology focused. This curriculum just flips that entirely. It sees the client as a resource-rich individual who is just, for now, stuck in a malfunctioning system.
So instead of asking, what's wrong with you, the architect is asking, what's wrong with the setup around you?
Exactly. And I think more importantly, how do we design a future setup that works for you? That's the forward focus. You aren't just analyzing the wreckage of the past. You're building the infrastructure for the future.
And to do that, you need tools that go way beyond just talking in a room.
Way beyond.
Which brings us to probably the most buzzword-heavy, but honestly the most fascinating part of this document, the phygital ecosystem.
Phygital?
Yeah.
Physical plus digital.
Now, usually when I hear terms like that, I kind of roll my eyes. It sounds like corporate marketing speak,
I get that.
But looking at the delivery matrix in the course guide, they are taking this so seriously. This isn't just, we have a website for your homework.
No, not at all. It's a structural blend of learning environments. Let's look at the physical layer first. Even though this is a high-tech degree, it has these mandatory residencies. Students have to fly to London, to the recovery coaching campus in Battersea, or the Foundation Clinic. These are 10-day intensives.
And looking at the schedule for those days, they are not sitting in lecture halls watching PowerPoint slides.
No, it's somatic body work. It's these Ubuntu circles. It's deep interpersonal group dynamics. And the curriculum makes a very strong point here. You cannot learn human connection through a screen.
Right.
There are just things like reading microexpressions, feeling the energy in a room, or co-regulating someone's nervous system that just require physical presence.
Co-regulation's a huge one there. That's the idea that my calm nervous system can actually help settle your anxious one. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's biological. It involves pheromones, mirror neurons, things Zoom just cannot transmit yet. So they established that human layer first, but then they pivot to the digital layer. And this isn't a video call. This is the Mountie VR Metaverse.
The virtual campus. And this is where I want to push back a little, because we've all seen these educational metaverses that are basically just clunky cartoons of classrooms, right?
Yeah.
Is this actually adding value, or is it a gimmick?
It's a fair skepticism, a really fair question. But the application here is very specific. They aren't using VR for lectures. They're using it for safe failure.
Safe failure. Go back to that. That was the cocktail party exam we started with.
Right. This is formally known as Q exposure therapy, or CET. In a normal counseling degree, you'd practice handling a relapse trigger by role-playing with a classmate in a brightly lit classroom. It's awkward. It doesn't feel real at all.
Yeah, it doesn't spike your cortisol. You know you're safe.
Exactly. But in the Mountie VR campus, they can drop you into a casino. They can put you in a simulated heated family argument. And your brain reacts to those visual and auditory cues almost as if they were real. Your heart rate goes up. The urge to flee kicks in.
So it's like a flight simulator for sobriety. Pilots crash in the simulator so they don't crash the real plane. These students practice the relapse in VR so they don't relapse in real life.
That is the perfect analogy. It allows for experiential learning without the catastrophic consequences. And it allows for global connectivity. The sources mention guest lectures in the Metaverse, where you have an expert in South Africa, a student in the UK, and a professor in the Netherlands, all in the same 3D space.
It really creates this global classroom vibe. But speaking of global, I want to pivot to the philosophical foundation of this whole thing, because you have all this high-tech, VR, AI, and then the entire curriculum is anchored in Ubuntu.
This is the most unique part of the documents, I think. You have the bleeding edge of tech on one side and this ancient wisdom on the other. And Ubuntu is an African philosophy, usually translated as "I am because we are."
Which is a beautiful sentiment. You hear it a lot in, community building. But how do you turn a philosophical slogan into a clinical framework? That feels like a bit of a stretch.
It does, until you look at how they deconstruct the power dynamics in medicine. Western medicine is traditionally very hierarchical. I am the expert, you are the patient, I have the knowledge, you have the disease, I fix you.
It's a transaction. I come to you to get fixed.
It is. And it can be really disempowering. It implies you're passive. Ubuntu flips that. It says, my humanity is bound up in yours. So in a clinical setting, this means rejecting the sort of God complex of the therapist. It moves toward co-created recovery.
So the community isn't just a support system for the treatment. The community is the treatment.
The we is the therapeutic agent. And the curriculum explicitly critiques Western models of privacy here. We tend to think patient confidentiality and individual autonomy are the gold standards. We protect privacy at all costs.
Well, yeah, and for good reason. You don't want your medical history out there.
Of course not. But the source material argues that sometimes that model can actually deepen the isolation. If I keep your struggle a secret from everyone, I keep you lonely. Ubuntu prioritizes shared humanity over strict individual privacy. It argues healing happens out in the open, in the collective.
That's a huge shift. It really challenges the whole idea of professional boundaries. If I'm a recovery architect operating under Ubuntu, aren't I getting too close?
That's the danger, right. And they have a term for this. They address it with a concept called the peer paradox.
The peer paradox. Okay, unpack that.
It's the tension between being a peer, someone with a shared history, maybe a former addict yourself, and being a professional with clinical responsibilities. This program creates a pathway for people with lived experience to get a Master of Science.
Which is a huge. Usually, if you're a former addict, you can be a sponsor or a peer mentor, but you hit this glass ceiling professionally, you're not going to be the clinical director.
Exactly. This degree validates lived experience as actual academic data. They use a research method called autoethnography. So students write these reflexive analyses of their own lineage, their own trauma. They treat their own life story with the same rigor they would a textbook case study.
That's what they're calling epistemic justice, is that right?
Epistemic just refers to knowledge.
Love
So it's
that.
about recognizing that the person who has lived through the fire knows something about the heat. The person who only studied the physics of fire can never know.
It creates equity.
Right, between the doctor and the recovering person.
I love that phrasing. But, and this is a hard pivot, we have to talk about the statistics.
Huh.
Because for all this talk about humanity and Ubuntu, there is a massive chunk of this course dedicated to hard math and AI.
The technosystemic side. This is where the recovery architect needs to be totally comfortable with data.
The sources mention digiceuticals, which sounds like a transformer, but I'm assuming it's software.
It's software as a medical device, yeah. The curriculum treats an app or a VR program as a prescription, just like a pill. But the really cutting-edge part, and maybe the most futuristic sounding, is the negative thought quantification framework, or NTQF.
Negative thought quantification. Okay, are they measuring bad vibes? How do you quantify a negative thought?
With natural language processing. They're teaching students how predictive modeling works. So imagine an AI that analyzes a client's journal entries, their chat logs, maybe their voice notes, with their permission, obviously.
Okay, so the AI is reading my diary.
Effectively, yes. And it's looking for linguistic shifts a human might miss. For instance, studies show that before a relapse, people often shift from active voice, I will do this, to passive voice, things are happening to me. Or they start using more absolutist words like always, never, everyone.
So the AI detects a mathematical pattern in my language that predicts I'm going to crash before I actually crash.
That's it. Right now, most care is reactive. We know someone relapsed because they showed up at the hospital. This NTQF model tries to make care proactive. The system flags the linguistic drift, it alerts the recovery architect, and they can intervene days, maybe even weeks, before the relapse event.
That is incredible. It's basically an early warning radar system, but they also use something called digital phenotyping. Is that similar?
Similar concept, but it uses passive data instead of language. It looks at how you interact with your phone, how fast you type, your sleep patterns from a watch, your GPS location.
So if I usually sleep 7 hours and type at a steady pace, but suddenly I'm sleeping 3 hours typing erratically, and my phone shows I'm in a location associated with my past, the system sees that.
It sees a digital phenotype of relapse, a relapse footprint.
Okay, obviously this involves a ton of personal data, and looking at the course outline, there's a big section on ethics.
Yes, and that's crucial. The curriculum really emphasizes data sovereignty, the idea that the client has to own their data, not the clinic. And they're very strict about human-in-the-loop protocols.
Meaning the AI doesn't make the medical decision.
Correct. The AI is described as a super assistant, not a robot doctor. It raises the flag, but the human recovery architect makes the call. It's a safety net, not a cage. But it relies so heavily on that Ubuntu connection we talked about. If you trust your architect, you'll share that data. If you don't, it just feels like surveillance.
So the technology only works if the humanity is established first.
Which brings us full circle right back to that phygital concept. The tech supports the human. It doesn't replace them.
Okay, we've covered the community and the computers, but we haven't talked much about the actual brain, the biology. Do they just ignore the medical side for all this coaching and coding?
No, and that would be irresponsible. They have significant modules on neuroscience. But again, the framing is different. They focus heavily on neuroplasticity.
The brain's ability to rewire itself.
Right. It aligns with that growth mindset. If the brain can change, then recovery isn't just about managing symptoms. It's about actively training for that change. But what really stood out to me was the integration of somatic intelligence and polyvagal theory.
Okay, polyvagal. We hear this term floating around a lot now. Give us the simple version. What is it?
So the vagus nerve is basically the highway connecting your brain to your body. Your gut, your heart, your lungs. Traditional talk therapy is top-down. You use your thinking brain, the top, to try and talk yourself out of anxiety.
Like, I shouldn't be scared, I shouldn't be sad.
Right, and that often doesn't work because the body is still screaming danger. Polyvagal theory focuses on bottom-up processing. You regulate the nervous system, the body first, use breathing, movement, safe touch, to send a signal of safety up to the brain.
And this connects back to the VR, doesn't it? The document mentions that digital interactions can be designed to soothe the vagus nerve.
Yes. This is fascinating. We know that social media or just constant notifications can dysregulate us. It puts us into fight or flight. This curriculum teaches students to design VR environments, like a specific virtual forest with binaural beats that can mechanically lower cortisol and engage the parasympathetic nervous system.
The rest and digest state.
Exactly. So the recovery architect isn't just asking how do you feel. They're looking at your sleep data, your community connections, your nervous system state, and they're prescribing a custom ecosystem, part digital, part physical, to regulate that whole system.
It's just, it's really impressive. When you look at the final assessment matrix, it's wild. To graduate, you have to facilitate a healing circle, analyze an AI spreadsheet, and design a VR prototype.
It creates a graduate who's bilingual. They
Wow.
speak clinical and they speak community. They speak code and they speak compassion.
So let's zoom out for a second for you listening. Why does this all matter? Most of us probably aren't enrolling in this master's program next week. Why should we care that this exists?
Because it represents a fundamental shift in how we think about getting better. We used to think the goal of treatment was just symptom reduction, stop using the drug. That's a deficit model. This model says, no, the goal is building recovery capital.
Recovery capital, define that for us.
It's the total sum of resources you have to support your life. Your social resources, so friends, physical resources like health, digital resources like these tools. The goal of the architect is to help you build a life so full of connection and support that the addiction becomes irrelevant. It's not about fighting the bad. It's about building the good.
It turns the brokenness into the foundation of the architecture.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And by making this a master of science, they're legitimizing the idea that having been through hell isn't a liability on your resume. It's actually a credential.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought that really struck me reading the intro to that Ubuntu module. We've been talking about this Mauni model and the idea that isolation is the pathology and community is the cure.
Right.
Well, if that's true, if isolation really is the disease, does that mean our current societal design, the way we live in our little individual boxes, scrolling on our individual screens, prioritizing our careers over our neighbors, is actually what's addictive?
That is the big question, isn't it? If the environment is the sickness, we are all going to need to become architects to fix it.
Something to chew on. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.